quick introduction to yourself, indicating whether you're in a 2-year, 4-year institution or some other institution, whether you're a faculty member or an administrator, what discipline do you teach or what primary disciplines are you responsible for, and especially what do you want to learn in the next hour. Also, John says, okay, okay, yes, you can read it in the chat. He wants email addresses. Great. Yes, math is often a bottleneck, unfortunately. And it is something we need to do something about. Yeah. Just while I'm waiting for more information to come through, I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but we began primarily focused on working with community colleges, but in the last couple of years have expanded to a number of 4-year comprehensive universities that have large populations of students who place at lower levels in mathematics. So we are learning quite a lot about those populations, and more of those universities are joining us. Okay, great. Great. I'm going to be talking about a number of ways in which we support students who are sort of demonstrated or traditionally understood as at risk, and I'll talk a little bit about the ways that we define that and some of the ways that we implement strategies and routines and interventions to support them. I'm just responding to some of the things coming up in the chat box. Right, Dawn. Right, some of the universities we're working with now are University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. We're also talking to Kent State. We work with a couple of the CSUs out here in California. John, I assume that the PowerPoint will be made available as well as the webinar recording. Is that correct?
Yeah, what we'll do is we're recording this now in a couple days. Actually, I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so it might be a week. I'll put it up on the LSMCE site, and the PowerPoint will be associated with
All right,
it,
so
if you'd like
it
that.
looks like
I mean,
we've
it's up to
slowed
the
down. That
speaker,
was
of
really
course.
helpful. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That was really helpful. Provided really good context for the remarks I'm going to make. And by the way, feel free as I continue to shoot questions in the chat box. I will be sort of looking that way on occasion, and I'll try to address them as I go along. Okay. So the central question that I want to organize my remarks around today is how can we radically transform our students' outcomes in developmental mathematics or in mathematics more generally? And one thing that I want to underscore is what we are trying to do here and what I want to talk about today is about radically transforming those experiences, not just sort of tweaking around the edges or incrementally changing things that might have a chance of improving outcomes marginally, but really dramatically changing the learning experiences that students have in their mathematics classrooms, in particular students who have been traditionally underserved in their mathematics education and for whom mathematics is not only a barrier, but sometimes even a fear, that can be an obstacle to their persistence, their engagement, and ultimately their success in learning of meaningful mathematics. So what should we focus on to do that? And I've just listed a couple of phrases here. Completion, absolutely, yes. We need to focus on getting them through and getting them through faster. And of course, we should help them in any way we can. And one of the things I'm going to share today is sort of how we structure our pathways to support that. Persistence. Yes, in order to complete, they have to demonstrate persistence, and we need to support them to employ strategies to be persistent, to keep showing up, to keep plugging away, particularly in the face of challenges both internal and external. And in our student population, we see that that is a major factor in their success, these sort of internal and external challenges that they face. But we also have to pay attention to what students are learning and how they develop through the learning opportunities that we offer them. And specifically, where we think about the quality of mathematics learning. What mathematics are they learning, and how well are they learning it? A lot of times, curricular reform can look like making things just faster, but everything looks the same, just faster. Or we provide supplemental instruction, but the base experience is still the same. We wanted to try to we wanted to try to address the quality of the learning experiences and therefore the quality of what was being learned and what we did. And then finally, we want to focus on our students' identities as learners, how they see themselves as learners and students in school, and how we can see themselves as people who can learn and succeed, in particular, can learn mathematics and succeed in mathematics, and then how those aspects of their identity development can serve them beyond their single mathematics class or a series of mathematics classes. So in this talk, I'm going to share with you what we've learned about how to achieve this aim in our work with the Carnegie Math Pathways. A quick note, because the math pathways are specifically designed for students who place into developmental mathematics, and more broadly, in order to address some of the failings that we see in developed mathematics, as is sort of currently predominantly offered, some of the lessons I'm going to share with you may be specific to contexts and populations somewhat different from yours. And in particular, since everyone, I think, here joining us is 4-year as opposed to 2-year, there might be some differences in organization or structure. But I do believe that these lessons are meaningfully applicable to post-secondary learning contexts in mathematics broadly, particularly STEM contexts and those students who have been underserved. Okay, so the rest of the talk is going to be reframed with 3 key questions. The first has to do with the sort of design of course structures or pathways that are responsive to the realities of our students' lives in order to give them the best chance for success. The second question has to do with how we can best support powerful mathematics learning and students' persistence and engagement in the curriculum and the pedagogy that we offer. And 3, how then can we sustain and continue to improve student success outcomes. Just a quick side note, hopefully you all know that this is the first of a series of webinars, a 2-webinar series. The second webinar is going to focus squarely on the middle question here and dive much more deeply into the curriculum and the pedagogy and the student supports for socio-emotional factors than I am going to be able to do today. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of context about the Carnegie Mathematics Pathways as a project, just to give you some background, and then also give you a reason for believing what I'm saying. I'm going to show you some of our results before then sort of launching into our lessons learned. What the Carnegie Math Pathways is seeking to address is this central problem. So as you might be aware, about 50% of post-secondary students in the United States are in community colleges, and about 60 to 70% of those students need at least one developmental math course before they can enroll in a college credit course. It's a very, very large proportion of the student population, the post-secondary student population in the United States. Unfortunately, 80% of those students do not get out of the developmental math pathway. The stats are about within 3 years, but typically if you don't get out of the developmental math pathway within 3 years, you don't ever get out of the developmental math pathway. And that amounts to about 500,000 students in every cohort that will never complete that math requirement, therefore never go on to be able to transfer to be able to complete their degrees and enter into the careers that they want. This is a huge problem, and the Math Pathways Project seeks to address that. Our theory of action is multifaceted and complex. There's lots of moving pieces. We're a systemic reform effort. I'm going to highlight some of these today, not all of them. I'm going to highlight the structure of an accelerated cohort-based pathway that we have designed. I'm going to focus then on the curriculum and the pedagogy, as well as the supports for students' productive persistence and language and literacy that are embedded within that instructional system. And then I'll speak a little bit about the professional learning opportunities and the professional development system that supports the teaching of the pathways, and how all of this activity sort of is engaged within a network that's seeking to always improve. Statway and Quantway are the two course pathways that make up the Carnegie Math Pathways. One is focused on statistics, which is Statway, and one is focused on Quantway, quantitative reasoning, which is Quantway. I'll say more about that in a second, but just to give you a sense of where we're at, since launching in 2011, we're now in over 58 institutions across the country, primarily two-year institutions, but also several four-year institutions. And all told, I think this number is higher than when this slide was created. It might be more like 28,000 students now. Okay, so why should you believe me at all? I'm going to show you just some global results from the work that we do. This first slide is about the Statway pathway. The Statway pathway is a full year developmental plus college credit statistics course that allows students to achieve college credit within a single year. So what we've done is done a comparison of descriptive statistics for this slide against the national averages. So nationally, only about 15% of students successfully complete their traditional sequence, including college level credit, by the end of 2 years. So if a student places in developmental mathematics, only about 15% of them get their college credit at the end of 2 years. In comparison, 49% of Statway students successfully complete the Statway course, therefore completing college level math in a single year. And this graphic sort of shows you in a step-by-step way that students in the traditional mathematics sequence nationally, only about 6% of them complete college credit within a year. That raises to 15% within 2 years. We've actually done this out to 4 or 5 years. It's kind of asymptotic to about 20%. Statway, in contrast, as I mentioned, is about 48-49% rate success, which is C or better, within a single year. So what we say is we've tripled the success rate in half the time. Those are the descriptive statistics. We've also done a much more rigorous analysis of we call it propensity score matching approach that matches every Statway student against 5 of his or her peers at their institutions against 44 dimensions, including previous course taking, placement scores, concurrent course enrollment, and demographics, and lots of other things. And what you see here is, in dark blue, the success rate, C or higher, for Statway students within a single year, so the 2 terms, as compared to their matched peers' successful completion rate within 2 years. So again, we see even with the apples to apples comparison that Statway students do dramatically better, close to triple the success in half the time against their matched peers. The blue line that you see sort of running through the center of that is actually our enrollment, our yearly enrollment in Statway. Excuse me. And what we overlay this to show you that we are able, or our network is able to sustain these high rates of success even as we spread to more and more institutions and scale up within those institutions. This particular slide is the same thing, but with one institution taken out, and I'm going to say more about them later. But you can see, so for the rest of the network, if we don't include that one college, that the success rates are quite stable around 56-60%. And then our propensity matching analysis allowed us to be able to do, again, an apples to apples across subgroups. And here I'm not going to go into it in detail, but you can see again that the Statway students' success rate within a single year is dramatically better than the match comparison within 2 years across, it turns out, all subgroups. This shows just 6. The next set of slides is about QuantWay, which is our quantitative reasoning pathway. QuantWay is organized slightly differently, and what the results you're going to see focus on is just the developmental sequence alternative called QuantWay 1. So nationally, about 29% of students successfully complete the traditional Dev Math sequence by the end of 2 years. This slide, by the way, has mistakes in it. The labels success in 1 year should actually say success in 1 term, and the label success in 2 years should actually say success in 2 terms. So the comparison we're making here in the traditional is 1 term and 2 terms against QuantWay success in 1 term. And similar to what we saw in Statway, QuantWay students are successfully completing their Dev Math requirement at dramatically higher rates than what is seen in nationwide statistics. We call it double the success in half the time. And we also ran the propensity score analysis with QuantWay students, and again, we see same kind of story as with the descriptive results, and an even increase in success rates over time as we have dramatically increased enrollment. And again, the subgroup analysis. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong slide. It doesn't have the labels on the bottom, but it's the same labels, male, female, across the 3 different racial subgroups. Okay, so before I move on, does anybody have a question? You can like unmute yourself or type something. Okay, great. So I showed you all of that so that you know, there's some reason for you to believe what I'm going to tell you about what we think works. So the first question, as I mentioned before, one key question for me, for non-STEM liberal arts students, should we teach what they need for learning in life, or what we as mathematicians are prepared to call college level mathematics? That's a very good question. Do you want my personal opinion? My personal opinion is that we need to do the former, absolutely, without closing doors for the latter. So what do I mean by that? I think that there is a lot of very deep, rigorous mathematics that students can and should learn in order to productively engage in everyday life, as well as be productive citizens and be able to engage successfully in whatever careers they choose. And when addressed deeply and thoughtfully in the curriculum and pedagogy, I think that can be a very strong preparation for what we traditionally think of as college level math. Typically in these conversations, the difference between, you know, like sort of, you know, it's a little straw-manny, but quantitative reasoning or quantitative literacy on the one hand versus sort of an algebra STEM pathway on the other, is the difference typically are the mathematical content topics. So an algebra pathway or a STEM pathway is going to have typically a lot more algebra topics, and they might be treated at a more abstract level. Hopefully, they would be in the STEM pathway treated with as much care about conceptual understanding and attention to application that one would hope in a quantitative literacy class. Um, but oftentimes that's just not the case. So, so I guess what I'm saying is, yes, non-STEM liberal arts students, I think, need to have the kinds of mathematics that is going to serve them well in their life and their career. And I don't think that necessarily precludes them from being prepared for more advanced mathematics, although that there might be topics that they need to fill in other kinds of ways. I'm going to show you a slide in just a second that addresses how we deal with that. So maybe I'll just go to that. Yes, I'll go to that. So, okay, give me a second and I'll get there. So, how can we design course structures given the reality of students' lives in order to give them the best chance for success? As I think all of you probably know, developmental math sequences can be 3 courses, sometimes 4 courses. I've even seen 5 courses before you can get to college level mathematics. And what the research says and what we have found is that it's critically important to reduce that sequence, shorten that sequence by reducing the number of transition points. This is typically seen as acceleration. Across a whole bunch of different initiatives in the country, including our own, acceleration has been shown to be highly effective in raising success rates. And by doing so, well, because in part by doing so, what we're doing is reducing the number of transition junctures that allow students to be able to essentially not re-enroll. So life often gets in the way. The longer something is going to take you, the more chances life has to get in the way. And so even students who are successful in some of the earlier developmental math courses might have a lot of reasons for why they can't continue. So the research definitely shows that reducing the number of transition points, typically through acceleration, is in and of itself successful in improving outcomes. What we have done, and this is just a rendering of Statway and Quantway's organization, is taken what is traditionally here, we just showed a 3 course sequence, elementary, intermediate, and then college level mathematics, the end of which then, of course, students who successfully complete that semester of college level math attain college math credit. We've reduced that to 2 terms. Statway is a single integrated year-long course, at the end of which students will have met their developmental math requirement as well as completed their college math credit. Quantway is organized slightly differently. It's broken up into 2 different courses. Quantway 1 is a developmental math alternative focused on quantitative reasoning, and Quantway 2 is the college level quantitative reasoning course. And so at the end of completing the Quantway pathway, Quantway 1 plus Quantway 2 or some other college level QR course, students can attain college math credit. So what we're doing is we're taking a sequence that is typically 3, sometimes 4 or 5 semesters long and reducing it to 2. And at the same time, as you saw, dramatically increasing the proportion of students who are successful. The orange bit there is what I was referring to earlier as bridging the Statway and Quantway learning experiences and learning outcomes to STEM. So to a more typical college level mathematics sequence that leads to STEM disciplines. What we call it, we call it the bridge courseware. It's flexible courseware that was developed by a consortium of 6 colleges within our network in order to do exactly what we discussed before, which is to fill in those mathematical topics that are necessary for a student who wants to go into pre-calculus from Statway or Quantway pathway. Those topics were determined by a scan nationally of what is required typically for a student who is entering into pre-calculus to have completed. As you can imagine, there is quite a lot of variability across the country, so the set of topics is sort of a consensus national set of topics. But those course modules were designed, A, to be flexible and used in a number of ways. So it could be used as a summer booster, it could be used as a co-rec, it could be used as a supplement in some other way. And they were designed using the same pedagogical and instructional design principles of Statway and Qualtway. So they were really meant to bring what we know about how best to engage students and support their persistence and retention, but in those content areas that are important for college level and a college level mathematics in a STEM pathway. Yes, the bridge is for college credit. The content is college level content. How a college chooses to implement the bridge then may determine the number of credits that they would get. You know, some colleges would choose to actually make it a course for 3 credits, but a lot of other places are doing it as a summer booster or doing it as a co-rec, in which case it looks different. I hope that answered that question. But it is college level course material. So this slide is a different way of looking at the results that highlights how all of the colleges in the network have shown improvements for the students in, this is just Statway, in Statway as compared to the students not in Statway. But the thing that I want to highlight here are the red triangles. We have a kind of natural experiment within the network in which several institutions, and this is an early slide, and now it's several more institutions, are actually further reducing the number of transition points to offer Statway within one semester, 2 quarters, or sometimes even a single very, very intensive quarter. And you can see that even though the demands on students are dramatically greater, that the success rates are just as high or even higher than with other Statway implementations. And what this showed us, along with a lot of other analytics that we've done looking at what factors are important for understanding our success outcomes, this shows us that reducing the number of transition points is really an incredibly important thing for the reasons that I articulated before. And because of these data and these results, more and more of our colleges are moving toward an accelerated and or co-rec kind of a situation with Statway and Qualtway, reducing that developmental math plus college credit pathway to a single term. The second point I want to make here about the designing of course structures is what we call our cohort model. So as I mentioned before, both Statway and Qualtway are year-long, in their original implementation, are year-long courses. And one design element that we think is really important is, in as much as logistically possible, keeping those students together over the course of the year. That speaks to that points to one of the things I'm going to talk about later, which is productive persistence and the socio-emotional factors that support students' retention and achievement. But we have found that by adhering to a cohort model, students not only develop stronger relationships with their instructor and with their peers, but ultimately then with the content itself. And we have some data on this. This is that institution that I mentioned earlier that we took out of the network-wide results just to show you what the network-wide results would be without this one institution. They have been unable, due to local institutional reasons, to keep the cohort model intact. So all of their Statway 1 students, first-term Statway students, take Statway 1 with a particular instructor, and then they have to re-enroll in some completely different time slot with a different instructor in the second term. The re-enrollment rates are not dramatically different than those of other colleges, but there really is a difference in the nature of the experience. And what this slide shows is in 2013, so the first 2 bars are their first 2 years of implementation, where they did manage to keep the cohort model in place. Again, the brown line there is their enrollment. So as they scaled up, they were unable to maintain the cohort model. And you see that their rates dramatically dropped. They, since then, have been working on to try to get the cohort model working again for them logistically, but they have been unable to. Of course, there's a lot of things going on with this case. When you dramatically increase enrollment the way they did, there's a lot of other moving parts that are impacted. But this case, as well as other data across the network, really does suggest to us that that the principle of keeping students together through course sequences is a good lever for improving student outcomes. Okay. So the second question that I want to focus us on now is about what happens in the classroom. How can we best support powerful mathematics learning and students' persistence and engagement? So the first point is about the curriculum. Our curriculum is designed with the core principle that students need to engage mathematics through authentic and relevant situations that reflect things that they care about in their lives, or that are important in the broader social sphere. So we think that that promotes not only students' engagement, but also deeper mathematics learning. Oopsies, I'm pressing the wrong button. So the curriculum does this in a number of ways, and I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. Here is one of statistical computation that you might see in a statistics class, intro statistics class, asking students to calculate the standard deviation, as compared to a Statway problem situation in which students have to think through in a more conceptual basis standard deviation. I'm not going to read through this, and unfortunately something is wrong with this little slide, so it looks weird for you. But I'm just going to underscore that in Statway, we're not saying that students never have to calculate the standard deviation. Of course they have to calculate the standard deviation. And of course they learn how to calculate the standard deviation. But in addition, we ask them to apply understandings of what standard deviation means conceptually to problem situations that asks them in the context of some real thing how to reason with standard deviation. And that runs all the way through the Statway curriculum. Similarly, in QuantWay, it's a quantitative reasoning course, so there's a lot of stuff in there that is very focused on applications of mathematical ideas and methods. But, you know, what you might see in a typical algebra class is, of course, you know, finding an equation of a line, passing through the points. This is super standard kind of a thing. In QuantWay, you might see that somewhat differently. You might see, you will always see some sort of contextualizing problem situation, and then a task that motivates the finding of an equation of a line, and then reasoning with that equation in order to be able to make some kind of decision or make sense of some kind of aspect of that problem situation. This one happens to be about phone plans. It's a little bit outdated, but again, it's just emblematic of the kinds of ways that we try to make sure that the curriculum really is speaking authentically and relevantly to students, and that the mathematics in them are motivated by the problem situation. I'm going to pause really quick. Audie has a question. I have a quick question about one of the previous slides about cohorts. Were there any findings suggesting what the optimal cohort composition might be? That's a great question. No, we have not done that analysis. This is something, I think, no meaning we have not done that analysis, not no meaning we don't have evidence. This is something that we're going to be embarking on this year to better understand some of, in particular, the equity implications of different, different populations of students in the classroom and the compositional makeup of the classroom in relation to what the instructor is doing in terms of their practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but one of the features of the work that we do is that these aren't just curricula, and this is not just a pedagogy that goes with the curricula. We are actually a network of faculty across the country, and we work with our faculty very closely to co-design all aspects of the curriculum, the assessment, the pedagogy, and the professional development. One of the initiatives that has come out of our work with the faculty and our own analysis that raises questions exactly like what you've asked, Audie, is that we are going to be undertaking a real hard look at what equity means and what social justice means in the context of our outcomes and the learning experiences, both curricularly and pedagogically, that we offer in our classrooms. And then we're going to be working with faculty and experts to develop even further improvements to the curriculum and or new kinds of practices and professional development to support those practices to better achieve more equitable learning opportunities for students in the classroom and more equitable outcomes. That wasn't exactly what you asked, but that's what made me think of. Audie is typing. I'm going to keep going and then I'll get back to that when you're finished. Oh, you're very welcome. I wanted to also not only show you number data, but I wanted to quantitative data about our results, but I wanted to show you a little bit about what our students think. Again, I'm not going to read these, but please just take a moment. These are really, we hear this year after year from hundreds of students, these kinds of sentiments. And these particular quotes have to do with sort of the relevance and the value of the curriculum. The second principle has to do with employing instruction that promotes the development of flexible expertise and engages students actively and collaboratively. So what is flexible expertise as opposed to routine expertise? Routine expertise is the kind of thing that we would typically see in mathematics classrooms and in mathematics learning experiences where students learn to master procedures and get really fluent at them. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's really important. But flexible expertise, in addition to procedural fluency, emphasizes the conceptual understanding necessary to understand why you're doing what you're doing procedurally, as well as the disposition to use mathematics to make sense of the world and to think mathematically. And then especially the ability to bring that knowledge and practice mathematically to bear across a wide variety of situations, which is really what we need when we're using mathematics out in the world, and that's what we want for our students. We have worked with researchers in a number of different disciplines to develop sort of three big ideas, what we call the learning opportunities that are the principles of learning that undergird the development of the curriculum and pedagogy, the notion of productive struggle, that students need opportunities to struggle with challenging and important mathematics just beyond what it is that they're able to do, so as to stretch and grow their understanding. The second idea being that of explicit connections. This speaks to the importance of students having opportunities to explicitly connect the conceptual ideas to the procedures, to the problems and situations that they're encountering, as well as mathematical facts and so on. That it really is the strength between those connections that results in robust, long-lasting mathematical understanding that is flexible. And then third, this notion of deliberate practice. This speaks to the idea that while practice, of course, is important for mastery, there are different kinds of practice. And what you would typically see in a mathematics classroom is repetition of skills and procedures. Deliberate practice speaks to the notion that practice should be more intentionally designed to increase the variation of the mathematical thinking that's required around the specific learning goals or outcomes that lesson is focused on, for example, and that the task sequence become more complex over time, so that the first question maybe probes at a certain kind of idea, but the third question increases the complexity with which that particular idea is treated. Realizing those three learning opportunities in the pedagogy, however, can be really challenging for instructors. So we have developed a number of different scaffolds for communicating and supporting instructors to implement the learning opportunities. This is just one of them. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go into it in any detail. But just suffice it to say that this kind of thing is designed to help instructors support productive struggle, to better understand how to implement collaborative learning strategies in their classroom, and really value and make visible students' ideas in order to clarify and build and present the mathematical learning goals of a lesson. And here are some more student voices. These are particularly about small group work and struggle and its value. And then the last thing I wanted to address with respect to what happens in the classroom is this notion of productive persistence and its integration into math curriculum and pedagogy. And as I said, we're going to get into much more detail about this in the next webinar. Productive persistence speaks to the socio-emotional factors that support or hinder students' engagement, persistence, and learning in our case, mathematics. This idea of productive persistence and the productive persistence agenda was developed in partnership with social psychologists around the country, as well as cognitive scientists and experts in classroom teaching. And they took a whole bunch of different ideas and whittled them down to 5 key ideas. The first has to do with what we term growth mindset, and of course that's related to the work of Carol Dweck and David Yeager, both of whom we've worked with here. Students need to believe that they are capable of learning mathematics. As you can imagine, for a lot of our students, in fact, we have data on this, it's about 80% of our students, do not walk into the classroom believing that they are capable of learning math. So this is something we need to address within the mathematics classroom. The second, the purple box, refers to what we call social belonging. It's incredibly important for students to feel that the classroom and the school is a place in which they are certain they belong, and that they are valued for their contribution. And again, this is something that we seek to be explicit about and improve in the classroom setting. The third, the blue box, has to do with students' perception of the value of the course. We explicitly have interventions and routines that support students to recognize and reflect on the value of the course material and the course itself for themselves and for society more broadly. Fourth has to do with academic skills and know-how. And again, there are mathematics and course-specific ways in which we support students to develop those kinds of skills and know-how. And the final brown box has to do with how all of those things are then supported by faculty and by colleges. After that group of researchers and experts got together and winnowed it down to these big ideas, then of course we had to measure whether those were the right ones. So we've done a series of studies looking at students who are deemed at different levels of risk against those constructs I just spoke of. And we used a survey to determine this. In fact, we still use this survey in every single course. And what you see here is that the at-riskness in the productive persistence indicators does predict failure at mid-course and end-of-course assessments. And the one thing I do want to point out here is not only does it predict failure in the mid and end course assessments, but those effects are greater at the end of the course. And what this suggests to us is that those kinds of mindsets don't say the effects of those kinds of mindsets when they're negative. So, for example, when students don't believe that they can do mathematics and therefore there's no point in making any effort, or that they have a high degree of mathematical anxiety, or they feel very uncertain that they belong in this context. Those kinds of beliefs can result in a cycle of disengagement and then confirmation through lower test scores or not understanding what's going on in the classroom that then reinforces those same mindsets. So you see this sort of cycle of disengagement and reinforcing of negative mindsets that results in an even greater correlation of at-riskness and failure of assessments. However, even though that's a really, really negative story, what we have learned is that you really can change those mindsets. So what we have developed is a set of routines, interventions, and practices, much of which are put in place in the first 4 weeks of class to really shake up how students think about themselves, get them to reflect on different ways of understanding themselves as learners, and also to help instructors create positive classroom environments for social belonging and for risk-taking mathematically, and to reduce math anxiety. And what this slide shows you is that, yes, these interventions in the first 4 weeks can dramatically make a difference against all of these ideas, and therefore changing the story of the previous slide. And again, we have a couple of voices of students who speak to some of the issues in productive persistence. And these are things we hear all the time from students. Okay, so last bucket. So while, of course, it's important to improve student outcomes, really, you know, what's most meaningful is if those student outcomes can be sustained and improved even while scaling. Can you elaborate a bit more on which interventions were you using? I don't have time today. The next webinar, and I don't know which day it exactly is devoted to that. So we're going to be talking a lot more about how the pedagogy is supported and how the productive persistence routines and interventions are, what they are and how they're incorporated into the curriculum and into the pedagogy. There it is, Friday, October 14th. So how can this good work be sustained and improved even as we spread it out to more and more and more folks? Because I think this is exactly the kind of thing that, you know, now as a field we need to be really worried about. Lots and lots of us have come up with really great ways of moving the needle in our own classrooms or moving the needle in our institutions. What's really important is that needle stay high and keep getting higher, and that more and more and more folks do that. So how? We've learned a couple of things. This is hard, but we've learned a couple of things. One, provide sustained, meaningful opportunities for learning from and about practice for instructors. This is professional development. And I'm just going to, I mean, I have like 30 seconds, but I'm just going to say a couple of things about what is really important in terms of designing faculty professional development for instructional improvement, especially when you're talking about something like StatWay or QuantWay that for so many of our math faculty are so distant from what they have done or what they have experienced. So first off, and perhaps most importantly, these professional learning opportunities need to be sustained. A one-day workshop, a one-weekend workshop is not going to be enough in order to support folks to be able to understand, take up, and meaningfully engage in over time. So meaningful change in pedagogical practice takes time, and therefore it takes sustained professional development opportunities. Second, professional development needs to be flexible and responsive. In particular, in the kinds of contexts in which we work in 2-year and 4-year universities, a lot of these folks are adjuncts or they're full-time faculty that have many, many, many other things going on. And typically there isn't, especially in 2-year colleges, there isn't resources and time specifically set aside and incentivized to engage in professional development for instructional improvement. So any program needs to provide flexibility and responsiveness in order to be able to actually reach those people. Third, just like our pedagogy in Statway and Quantway is focused on active learning and collaboration, so is the professional development. Everything needs any meaningful learning, including change in practice, learning to change in practice, needs to really be grounded in the principles of social learning. And for teachers, that can be an incredibly incentivizing and really energizing experience. Fourth, professional development needs to be grounded in examples and experiences of real teaching. We do this with initially a lot of video and cases that our instructors engage in, but then also there are lots of opportunities for folks to reflect upon their own examples of real teaching in their own classroom with others and think through and problem solve together. The professional development needs to be job embedded, meaning we're not going to be giving you tools and we're not going to be asking you to do things that are so far afield from the work that you all are engaged in and day out that it's either not feasible for you to do or it's seemingly not meaningful to you to do. So we have spent a great deal of time trying to understand the work processes and practices of 2- and 4-year faculty, adjunct and full-time, in order to make sure that what we offer has a chance of being embedded within their own work practice. And then lastly, while we believe that theory is critically important for helping instructors understand why they're doing what they're doing and what they ought to do, that theory has to be related to practice. So we have almost no talking head kind of engagements with faculty about the underlying theory. That's not to say that they don't engage all the time with the principles of that theory and the research that that empirically gives us evidence for the efficacy of those theories. But we endeavor always to make theory related to practice. And then lastly, we believe that ongoing collaboration amongst multiple stakeholders, including faculty, but also students and administrators, is necessary to accelerate and spread learning. Really, sustaining and improving success outcomes is all about always learning. And the way we do this is in a structure that we call the Pathways Networked Improvement Community. So as I mentioned several times, we are actually a network. We're a particular kind of network. We're organized as what we call a networked improvement community. What this slide shows you is just that the instructional system, which is that funny looking thing in the middle, with the curriculum and pedagogy, productive persistence, and language and literacy supports, is supported by the Advancing Quality Teaching program, which is our professional development program. It is also then supported by a series of activities and a network of folks engaged in helping institutions be effective, ready, and support their ongoing implementation. And all of that sits within a larger network that is organized to share data, share a networked online environment in which faculty work together and administrators work together to share their learning and test new ideas, share back the results of those ideas so that those learnings can move forward and be spread and improve what we're doing. There's a lot more on the kind of theory and empirical results of networked improvement communities on the Carnegie Foundation website. We are one example of a networked improvement community that has come out of the foundation. But I share this with you because I believe that over and above the work that you individually do in your classroom or that you do in your institution, this notion that we collectively need to be doing something about this problem and to help these students nationally is something that requires a radically different way of working together. And a networked improvement community is a potential mechanism or potential organizational structure for doing that. I'm going to skip that slide. So I'm going to end with a kind of, I don't know, call to action. We firmly believe that radical transformation in education requires a couple of things. One is a will for collective action. One person doing something on their own is heroic, but the impact that we need for radical transformation for our students across this country is not going to happen without a will for collective action. Together, we then need to be able to understand what is producing the results that we currently have. Our early work involved a whole year of investigation of the system at 2-year and 4-year colleges, very broadly speaking, and trying to understand the levers and the barriers for student success. And that kind of work is necessary at the institutional level and at the level of systems and even states and across the country in order for us to make true radical transformation. And then lastly, we need to mobilize across the system in order to be able to take action across the system. So we have to put that will into actual action across the system in order to make this change. And that is something that is a really big lesson of our work. We are trying to make a difference across the country, sort of one college at a time. And what we're learning is that while that is incredibly gratifying and it's touching thousands and thousands and thousands of students, really all of us need to be working together in order to do this, in order to really make a difference in who gets to do mathematics, how well they get to do it, and therefore who gets to contribute further in their own careers, whether they be STEM or not. And that's all I have. I end here with, in case you're interested, it's a save the date for our Winter Institute in January here at the Foundation to learn more about what we do. I'm also very happy to answer whatever questions you might have. I'm sorry, I was supposed to leave, I think, 10 minutes for questions, and I failed to do so, but I did answer a few questions along the way. And Don White says, I am a statistician. Can you describe in any quick way how Statway is lower level than a typical college level stat class? It is not. The college level, Statway is built, the Statway learning outcomes are college level learning outcomes with developmental learning outcomes integrated into it. So basically we take a semester-long college level stat class and add developmental mathematics as needed into it. So it is a college level math class. In fact, our Statway students do college level statistics on day one. And so it's not like you do developmental first and then launch into the college level statistics. The second question, can that or QuantWay be used as a material for co-remediation co-requisite for the associated college level class? Has anyone done that? That's a slightly complicated question. Statway is not designed for that because Statway, as I mentioned, is itself a college level stat course. QuantWay 1, the developmental level of QuantWay, can be used as a co-rec for other college level mathematics courses. Some have thought about it. I don't think anybody in the network really has done that, but it has been discussed. What's more common is to have QuantWay 2, the college level QR course, be the college level math course for non-STEM liberal arts students, and QuantWay 1 be a co-rec with that. So basically it's a QuantWay 2 course with stuff from QuantWay 1 as a co-rec for students who place quite low. So students who wouldn't have placed in QuantWay 2 to begin with. And hopefully does that make any sense? And then Nigel George says, it seems that you were saying the dominant factor in student learning is nurturing the mindset of growth because that sustains students through the difficulty of working with STEM content. It is a dominant factor, yes, absolutely. And our director of productive persistence, who will be speaking with me in the next webinar, can speak a lot more about that. But it's not only growth mindset, although growth mindset is centrally important, it's also we are finding social belonging is critical. So this sense that it's sort of countering the notion that if I didn't show up today or if I never did my homework, nobody would ever know. And that, as it turns out, is a huge factor in whether students keep at it in the face of challenges. Challenges not only in the content of the course and what happens in the classroom, but challenges external in their own lives. But please come join us for the next webinar and you'll learn way more about that. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so, so much. I do just, I find it odd